everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here to bring you guys my top 20 favorite books that I have read so far in 2022. So today I was actually planning on just filming like a recent favorites video because I realized that I never posted my top 5 books of May video, and then I hadn't done a top favorite books of June video either, so I was just going to combine the 2 months together. But then I saw Jess from Peace Love Books. Today she posted a video where she just talked about all of her favorite books that she's read this year, so I thought that that would be really fun. I also wanted to do this video because as much as I love the mid-year book freakout tag, I will link that up in the cards above, the questions in that tag don't really allow for you to talk about like all of your favorites that you've read this year because the questions are really targeted. So I just wanted to give myself the opportunity to gush about my favorites. At first, I had a list of 30 books, and all of these books, by the way, they just happen to be romance books because that's most of what I read nowadays. But I did narrow it down a bit to 20 books. And I also want to point out that these are the books that I am just still absolutely obsessed with to this day. Some of them I read back in January, some of them I read in June, and these are books that I almost have loved more and more since reading them. There are some books that I read that I do give 5 stars because I genuinely had a really great reading experience, but then like as I'm reflecting on the book, maybe I don't love the book quite as much. But these books are definitely new all-time favorites for me, and I'm just so excited to talk about all of them. So I thought first I would jump into the historical romances, and then I would get to the contemporary and paranormal romances. First up, I have to talk about my very first 5-star read of 2022, and that is The Devil and the Heiress by Harper St. George. This was quite the surprise for me that I loved this book as much as I did. I had seen a lot of my friends giving this 4 stars, but yeah, I just didn't think I was going to love it. And this book just ticked so many of my boxes. This one is about Violet, who is an American heiress living in London. This takes place in Gilded Age London. I love Gilded Age romances. And then we have Christian, who is a depraved English nobleman. I believe he's an earl and he desperately needs money. And so him and Violet end up traveling together, so it's like a road trip forced proximity romance. Like I literally have this entire checklist as my Goodreads review for this book of all the boxes that this ticked for me. One of the things I loved about this couple was that Violet is a romance author and Christian was just so supportive of that from the beginning, and he even asks her all about that, like why she writes romance. There's just so much chemistry between these two. There's even a great caretaking scene. There's a marriage of convenience in this as well that kind of turns into a marriage in trouble story, which that's like my favorite trope ever. And then there's even acts of service as the grand gesture, which that is also one of my favorite tropes. Like, yes, this book may not be the most innovative historical romance out there, but like I said, there's just so many things that I adore in this one story, so of course it has to be a favorite of mine. Next up, I of course have to talk about After Dark with the Duke by Julianne Long. This is book 4 in her Palace of Rogues series. This is one of the few books that I've read this year that made me straight up sob. I was crying so much at the ending. But this series as a whole is just so fun and charming, but there's also beautiful romances. Like this series has like everything that I could want in a historical romance. But this one is about Mariana, who is an opera singer. I myself am an opera singer, so I did relate to her a lot in that regard. But basically she's brought low because these 2 dudes fought a duel over her. She has no choice but to stay at the Grand Palace on the Thames, which is the boarding house that this series centers around. And then we have James, who is a duke, who is also staying at this boarding house. They automatically like hate each other's guts because James just judges the shit out of Mariana because of the duel and because she's an opera singer and all of that. And so she hates him right back. But this is just like a beautiful friends to lovers romance because basically James offers to tutor Mariana in the Italian language because that's a skill that you definitely need as an opera singer because a lot of what we sing is Italian. And so they develop a friendship through those lessons, and oh, this was just so beautiful. Like I said, the ending was everything because of the grand gesture that James does for Mariana. Just so amazing, and I cannot wait to read the next installment that just came out. It's called You Were Made to Be Mine, and I have a feeling that that book is going to be amazing as well. Next up, this is one of the best sapphic romances I have ever read. That is The Perks of Loving a Wallflower by Erica Ridley. This is book 2 in her Wild Winchesters series. So this whole series centers around the Winchesters. They have a kind of a found family aspect. I believe there's 6 siblings. They were all adopted by this baron who has now passed away. So Thomasina is a master of disguise. Each Winchester sibling has a certain set of skills that they bring to the table because they do crazy things like perform heists and solve cases and like all kinds of things. And so their newest client is Philippa, who is the other heroine in the story. And Thomasina like immediately falls for her, and she essentially starts dressing as the new Baron Vanderbean, even though that person doesn't exist, just so she can openly court Philippa. And I do want to make it known that Thomasina tells Philippa pretty early on in the book who she really is. This book was simply a delight from start to finish. I feel like Tommy and Philippa's romance has the perfect balance of like tenderness and sensuality and longing and charm and sweetness. And once again, like the Winchesters are everything. Thomasina herself is an absolute icon. Now, I didn't read book 1 just because that one got a lot of mixed reviews, but I had to jump into this one because literally all of my friends were giving this 5 stars. And I have to say, it deserves all of those 5-star reviews and even more. I feel like this is a book that a lot of people are sleeping on. All right, next up we have essentially the entire Hathaway series by Lisa Kleypas. I did read all 5 books in the first half of this year, and I truly love all 5 of these books pretty darn equally, but if I had to pick one book to talk about, it would definitely have to be Mine Till Midnight, which is also the first book of the series. This one is Cam and Amelia's story. This is just such a wonderful introduction into the Hathaways and who they are. They're just such a fun, quirky family. And Cam, the hero in this, come on, he is everything. I don't think there is another romance hero in existence that is quite like Cam Rohan, and I'm totally okay with that. He is just such a unique character, and I love him so freaking much. Like, we love a hero who will just unapologetically go for who and what he wants, and that, of course, is Amelia, our heroine. I could go on about this book. I could go on about this series forever. Just know that I highly, highly recommend it. These are definitely some of my absolute favorite Lisa Kleypas books. Next up, we have When She Said I Do by Celeste Bradley. This is probably one of the best, if not the best, historical romances that I've read that is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. I was addicted to Callie and Ren's story from page 1. Basically, this has to do with Callie and her family seeking refuge in this huge mansion that looks abandoned. And so Callie's just like going through the things in this house, even though she definitely shouldn't. And Ren comes upon her, but he is like blackout drunk, and he thinks that she is just like a ghost, a wraith of some kind. He's definitely not in his right mind. Steamy things start happening between the two of them. Callie's brother discovers them, thus they have to get married. And I'm also just obsessed with how steamy this book is. Like, this is arguably one of the hottest historical romances I have ever read, and there's also a really fun family dynamic because this is book 1 in, I believe, the Worthington series, and they're kind of like the Bridgertons on steroids. Like, all of these siblings are nuts, honestly, and that was definitely a really entertaining aspect of the story. But yes, can't recommend this highly enough. I definitely need more people to read this one. Next up, I have 2 historical romances that I read specifically for a reading vlog where I was binging brand new historical romance releases, so I will link that vlog up in the cards above. But the first book I have to bring up is The Bride Goes Rogue by Joanna Shupe. This is her newest release. This is the third book in her Fifth Avenue Rebels series. So this is a hate to love romance between Catherine and Preston. Basically, their fathers had arranged for the two of them to get married eventually, but Preston never took that promise seriously. Meanwhile, Catherine did, and so she goes to his office one day. By the way, this series, all of Joanna Shupe's books take place in New York City in the Gilded Age, but she shows up to his office one day because she's trying to start planning their wedding, and he's like, I'm not marrying you, I'm not marrying anyone. What? She gets pissed, and for good reason, and things go on from there. This is arguably the hottest romance that Joanna Shupe has ever written. I've read most of her books at this point, and this book is hot. Like, hot. Love the hate to love aspect as well. I really don't have much more to say about this book than that. If you want to know more of my in-depth thoughts, definitely check out that vlog, like I said. And then the other historical romance that I have to bring up from that vlog is A Daring Pursuit by Kate Bateman. This is book 2 in her Ruthless Rivals series. This is just one of those books, like all the other books on this list, that I find myself loving more and more and more upon reflection, even though I definitely loved it during my reading experience. But yeah, like, Tristan and Heiress are everything. This is kind of like an enemies with benefits situation, though they definitely don't really hate each other. It's just that this whole series centers around like the Davies family and the Montgomery family, kind of like a Romeo and Juliet vibe going on because both families have been feuding with each other for years. And so that's kind of where like the enemies thing comes into play, but they don't hate each other. It's definitely more of just like witty banter between the two of them. And so yeah, they start this affair. This is just a beautiful romance. This is also Kate Bateman's steamiest book yet. I've read, I believe, 5 of her books at this point, and this one is definitely the hottest. Of course, I highly recommend this one, and I cannot wait for the third and final book in this series. I believe that one is called A Wicked Game, if I'm not mistaken, and that one is coming out, I believe, in late December. And for my last historical romance, I have to talk about The Devil is a Marquis by Lisa Braden. This is book 4 in her Rescued from Ruin series. I do want to point out though that I do think you could read this one as a standalone, because I don't really think that you absolutely need the context from the first 3 books of this series, though I did enjoy those books. But I just wanted to point that out. So this definitely gave me a lot of vibes of Devil in Winter by Lisa Kleypas. This couple totally has the same vibes as Evie and Sebastian from that book. So Charlotte is an American heiress, and her father will do anything to get her a title, to have her marry someone who is titled in London. And so he arranges for her to marry Benedict, who is a known rake, a known wastrel. He is definitely not having a good time in his life. But Benedict is desperate for money, and that's what Charlotte's father has. So they go into this very interesting marriage of convenience agreement where if Benedict and Charlotte stay married for a year, Benedict will get a certain amount of money, something like £100,000, like an insane amount of money. And so Charlotte agrees to it too, because this marriage will also eventually give her the means to go back to America and live the life that she's wanted to live. And so they end up going to live at one of his estates, but it's in disrepair. Like, it's kind of unlivable. And so they start falling for each other while also working on this house. The main thing that I love so much about this book is Benedict, our hero. He goes through like the most amazing character arc and transformation of like any historical romance hero that I have ever read about. Like I said, at the beginning of the book, he is pretty much a wastrel. He gets drunk all the time. He has like no will to live. And so seeing him go from that to being like the most amazing man and husband ever by the end is just so satisfying to read about. I also really appreciated Charlotte's character and just their romance in general. There's some really great steamy scenes in this. Also, I wanted to throw out there that I would highly recommend following the Smart Women Reads Romance podcast. I will link them down in the description below because they did an episode on The Devil is a Marquis. I believe that's the first episode of theirs that I ever listened to, and it just made me love this book even more. So I highly recommend checking out that episode once you read this book yourself. So before we jump into my contemporary romances, I wanted to talk about 2 Harry Potter fan fictions that honestly, truly are 2 of my favorite things that I have ever read. So of course I had to bring them up in this video. The first one, of course, is Manacled by Sen-Lin Yu. I talk about this fan fiction all the time, so I will not spend a lot of time in this video talking about it. If you want to know more of my thoughts, definitely check out my mid-year book freakout tag. I already have that linked. And then I also have like my mid-January wrap-up where I talked about this fan fiction for at least 10 minutes. But what I will say here is that this is definitely one of the darkest things I have ever read. It's also one of the longest things I've ever read. It's well over like 1,500 pages, but it is completely worth all of that page time. This also has a spectacular dark romance between Draco Malfoy and Hermione Granger. So the other fan fiction that I will never shut up about is Contradictions by Ampersand. This one is another Hermione fan fiction where we have Hermione. She is very frustrated with her sex life, basically, and so she decides to join this very private, exclusive sex club where she can get matched up with a dom. She's more of a sub, so she's going to get matched up with a dom to kind of help her out with her frustrations, basically. And the dom that she ends up getting matched up with is Draco Malfoy. She has not seen him since the end of the war, and so obviously things don't start out well between the two of them. But when I tell you guys this is the best, and I mean the best, BDSM romance I have ever read, I truly mean that. This is also the perfect romance to go into if you've never read a BDSM romance, just because I feel like it introduces the concept really well as like all the terminology that you need to know, just how a dominant submissive relationship works. The Draco in this fan fiction, he's just perfect. I love everything about him. I could go on about just his character, but yeah, this was one of the hottest things I've ever read, and I can't recommend it enough. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump on into some contemporary romances that I have absolutely adored this year. The first one I have to bring up is Sweet Talk by Cara Bastone. So this is one of her Audible original audiobooks. So this is a pretty short audiobook. It's just about 5 hours, and I do want to point out that there is like no steam in this. There's no steam in any of the books in this series, just because all of them end with the couple actually getting together, and that may sound very frustrating, but somehow Cara Bastone really makes it work. So this is a romance between Jesse and Elliot. It's one of those like, oops, wrong number, but let's keep talking romances, because essentially Elliot texts Jesse accidentally. I think he means to text his sister, but they just start a conversation and that turns into phone calls. This is just the cutest and sweetest romance ever. Elliot is the sweetest of cinnamon roll heroes. This was just such a great audiobook to listen to right before going to bed, because every now and then I like to just lay in bed and listen to an audiobook, because that's a really good way to help me relax and to help me actually fall asleep. And so this audiobook was just perfect for that. It made me giddy and happy the whole time. I had butterflies in my stomach. Yeah, this was just fantastic. So I don't think it's a secret to anyone that I adore Cassie Mint with my whole heart. She is a romance novella author. She is like one of my favorite authors ever at this point. So my top favorite novella by Cassie Mint has to be Big Bet. This is part of her Big Boys series. Basically, she will write series of novellas that center around a theme or an idea, but you can definitely read them as standalones. And so this one features our hero Will. I can't remember the heroine's name. Oops. But Will is a blackjack dealer in this casino, and our heroine is a burlesque dancer at this same casino in Vegas. They have been friends for years. Cassie Mint knows how to write friends to lovers romances. Like the pining, the mutual pining in this novella, it was making me emotional. Like I could not help but fall in love with these two characters. Like this novella is everything. I don't know if she's ever going to top this novella in my mind. Next up, we have one of the best sports romances that I've ever read. This is Heated Rivalry by Rachel Reed. So this is a romance that I had heard a lot of people just rave and rave about. Like literally when I go on my Goodreads, everyone that I'm friends with that has read this has given it 5 stars. So I had a feeling I was gonna really enjoy this. I actually picked this up on a whim one day because I was just all of a sudden in the mood for a sports romance. So this is an MM hockey romance between Shane and Ilya. They are professional rivals. They play on like rival hockey teams, but over the years, like this novel takes place over, I want to say like 7 years, something like that. Over the course of those 7 years, they start hooking up with each other and falling in love. And this is a forbidden romance because the hockey industry definitely is not supportive of openly gay athletes. And so there's a lot of angst because of that. And like, I don't know what it is about Rachel Reed's writing. Like, I'm convinced that she somehow put crack into this book. Like, I could not stop reading. I couldn't help but just get so emotionally invested in this couple. There's also a sequel about this couple called The Long Game, which I also highly recommend. I gave that book 5 stars as well. But seeing them fall for each other in this first book was just everything. Like, oh my God, like I can still remember how I felt while reading this book. Their romance is just that amazing. This is also a very steamy romance. We love to see that. Next up, we have a novella that I recently read that I just fell so hard for. This is Nerdgasm by Kimberly Reese. So this is about Allie and Theo, and Theo is the TA for a college course that Allie is taking, and Theo is just the sweetest and most shy hero. He's also a nerdy hero. We love that. And so what I actually adored about this is that Allie is the one who pursues Theo first. Like, yes, they're mutually attracted to each other, but Theo's just so shy, and he was bullied a lot when he was younger. So I think he just feels like very insecure when it comes to asking girls out. And so yeah, she asks him out, but their first date is like the most amazing first date ever because he buys them tickets to go to like a Comic-Con like convention. Isn't that like the perfect first date? Like, if somebody bought me tickets to go to a Comic-Con, I would say yes in a heartbeat. I will say that you kind of have to suspend your disbelief a little bit with this novella because there's a scene where Theo is talking to Cohen, who is the professor that he TAs for, and Cohen gives him sex tips, and the lecture he gives Theo gets very interesting, and it's wacky, it's over the top, but I had a good time with it. I was laughing my butt off, so yeah, highly recommend this. Next up is a book that made me so freaking happy. This is The Weight of It All by N.R. Walker. The basic premise is that we have Henry, who has just been broken up with by his long-term boyfriend. Like, they had been together for like 8 years. Henry thinks that he needs to lose weight in order to get his boyfriend back, and so he gets a personal trainer whose name is Reed, and so this is a romance between Henry and Reed. Speaking of cinnamon roll heroes, Reed is the sweetest man ever. This is just the most amazing friends to lovers romance. I love how Henry and Reed bond over their like mutual fitness and health journey, but Reed never pressures Henry into losing weight or anything like that. He truly is just a very supportive friend who also happens to be his trainer. Yeah, this was absolutely adorable, absolutely hilarious as well. I laughed out loud several times reading this. The next book I have to talk about is Unhinged by Onley James. This is book 1 in her Necessary Evil series. So this is another found family aspect going on. We have 7 brothers who were adopted by this man Thomas. He is a psychologist, I believe. And so all 7 of these boys show signs of being either a sociopath or a psychopath. And so Thomas decides to raise these boys to become serial killers. So these men are basically vigilantes because they kill men that have done absolutely horrendous and horrible things. And so this one is about Adam, who is one of those brothers, and Noah. Now, 10 years before this book starts, Noah actually saw Adam kill his father, and so he is hell-bent on revenge against Adam, and so he kind of attempts to kill him, but Adam kind of talks him down, and this is definitely an insta-lovey, insta-lusty situation, but I didn't mind because for me, like, the writing was amazing. I was addicted to Adam and Noah's characters and their relationship from page 1. This is like the sweetest and most wholesome serial killer romance that you will ever read. I do want to quickly mention the Smart Women Reads Romance podcast again because they did an episode about this book, and once again, it made me love the book even more. So speaking of Juliet Cross, who co-runs the Smart Women Reads Romance podcast with Jessin from Jessin Reads Romance, we have Witches Get Stitches by Juliet Cross. This is book 3 in her Stay a Spell series. I read this back in January, and the thing with this series, by the way, this is a contemporary paranormal romance series that takes place in New Orleans. I am from New Orleans, I live here, so loved that. But also, somehow each book of this series gets better and better, and I don't know how Juliet Cross does it. I am also convinced that there is like crack or something in these books, because once I pick up one of these books, I can't stop reading it. The audiobooks are absolutely fantastic. That's like the only reason why I haven't read Always Practice Safe Hex, which is the newest book, because I am not so patiently waiting for the audiobook for that one to come out. This one is about Nico, who is a werewolf, and Violet, who is one of the Savoy sisters that this series also centers around. They are sisters who are witches. And I also feel like, as hot as book 1 was, which is Wolf Gone Wild, like somehow each book gets hotter and hotter and steamier and steamier. Like this book, hot. I don't know how else to describe it. These are wonderful romances, but I also love the paranormal aspect of this series because we get the kinds of creatures we're used to, like werewolves and vampires, you know, things like that. But we also have creatures like Grimms, which are creatures that we don't really know much about. They're very mysterious. And I also really like that each book has a really interesting like mystery suspense element thrown in. I just think that everything about this series is so well done. Easily one of my favorite romance series of all time. Next up, I have 2 books in Sophie Lark's Brutal Birthright series. I couldn't just pick one for this video, guys. I just couldn't. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Stolen Heir. This is book 2. This is definitely a Beauty and the Beast retelling. We have Miko, our hero. By the way, this is a mafia romance series. Miko is the leader of the Polish mafia in Chicago, and then we have Nessa, who is a part of the Griffins, which is the Irish mafia family. They've got some bad blood going on, and so Miko kidnaps Nessa, and things go on from there. Now, what I will say about this book is that the romance doesn't really kick in until about like 40% in, but somehow it just really worked for the story. Like, I feel like we needed that first part of the book to be just character development about Miko and Nessa and the plot and everything, so that we could get to the romance. Like, it just really worked. This is also the book that made me really fall in love with Sophie Lark as an author, because I read Brutal Prince last year. I really enjoyed it, but this one to me was just on another level. Just so good. And the other book I have to bring up that is a part of this series is Broken Vow. That is book 5. This is Riona and Raylan's story. I have to bring up the Smart Women Reads Romance podcast again, because they did an episode on this book specifically, and once again, their episode made me love this book even more than I already did, even though I was already obsessed with this book. So one of the things that's amazing about this book is that we have Riona, who's a grumpy heroine, and we have Raylan, who's a sunshiny hero, one of my absolute favorite tropes ever, and it's done so well in this book. But Riona is a part of the Griffin family. They are the Irish mafia family. She's also the lawyer for them. And so someone is out to kill her. Somebody has definitely put a hit out on Riona. An assassin has tried to kill her at this point. So the family decides to hire Raylan to be her bodyguard. Everything about this romance was perfection. There are suspenseful elements because, like I said, there's an assassin out to get her. There's an incredible romance between Raylan and Riona, and the way that both of their characters evolve and change throughout the book is everything. Absolutely amazing sex scenes. I have to point that out. Like, I totally get now why this is the fan favorite book of the series. It truly is that amazing. And then last but certainly not least, I have a mafia romance duet that I have to bring up. None of you are going to be surprised that I'm bringing up this duet, by the way, because I talk about this every chance I get. That is the Anti-Heroes in Love duet by Jenna Darling. I'm just gonna hold up the first book, which is When Heroes Fall. If you are looking for my top mafia romance recommendation, this duet is it. I desperately need to read more from Jenna Darling because her writing in this, it's just so lush, has so much depth to it. It's absolutely stunning. And Elena and Dante, our hero and heroine, are some of my favorite characters ever at this point. We also have kind of a Grumpy Sunshine dynamic where Elena, our heroine, is the grumpy character. She's also a lawyer, just like in Broken Vow, now that I'm thinking about it. And Dante is the capo of his Italian mafia family, and he's more of a sunshiny, very charming character. And the way that he pursues Elena is absolutely everything in this. Once again, the way that their characters develop throughout these two books is spectacular. Highly recommend the audiobooks, by the way. I think that both narrators did an incredible job with these characters and bringing their story to life. I talk about this duet all the time, but if you want to know more of my in-depth thoughts, I would highly recommend checking out my reading blog where I read some of Tori's favorite romance books. I will link that up in the cards above. That is Tori from Novel Life, because this is one of her favorite romances ever, and I'm so glad that I read this duet as a part of that vlog because I was able to really go into an in-depth discussion about why this series is so amazing. So that is going to be it for the top 20 books that I have read so far in 2022. I would love it if you would leave a comment down below if you want to tell me about some of the books that have been some of your absolute favorites this year, or if you want to discuss the books that I brought up in this video. I would also love it if you would leave a like and subscribe, and I thank you so much in advance if you do, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!